In this video, we are shifting our focus towards Artsakh. I've created this timeline to help visualize time, and while the exact date of the establishment of Artsakh is believed to be even older, for the purposes of this video, our story starts at 189 BC. The bottom half of the timeline shall represent the ruling entity in Artsakh proper, while the top half will show the highest ruling authority over the region. For instance, during this entire period, Artsakh was a province in the Kingdom of Armenia, so the timeline is just one solid color. Starting 53 BC, during the Roman-Parthian Wars, Armenia would become heavily contested between Rome and Parthia. The Armenian nobles were divided among pro-Roman, pro-Parthian and neutrals, and the kingdom itself would be ruled over by both empires as well as some period of independence. But within the kingdom, the province of Artsakh remained generally undisturbed. It is during this period Armenia becomes the first nation to adopt Christianity as a state religion, and Artsakh became a major stronghold for Christian Armenian missionaries. In 387, a peace treaty was signed between the East Roman Empire and Sassanid Persia. The two empires divided the Armenian kingdom among them. As a result, Artsakh may have been made part of the Albanian satrapy within Sassanid Persia, but would later be reclaimed by Armenia. This topic is heavily debated, and no evidence exists of Artsakh's inclusion in Caucasian Albania during this time. However, we do know that thanks to the creation of the Armenian alphabet at the beginning of the 5th century, and the founding of the first Armenian schools, there was an unprecedented rise of culture and science in entire Armenia and in particular in Artsakh, until the 7th century when the region came under Arab control as part of the Ostikhanate of Armenia. In the 9th century, two Armenian princes revolted against Arab rule and established two independent principalities. In the next few years, the Arabs would attempt to conquer the main stronghold of Artsakh 28 times but failed, paving the way to the formation of the Kingdom of Artsakh, which stayed Armenian-controlled until the Seljuk invasion in the 11th century, followed by Georgian suzerainty in the 12th century, then Mongol suzerainty in the 13th century. Despite the invaders, the region of Artsakh was being ruled by an Armenian principality called Khachen, which after the Mongols would fall under the control of various Muslim Turkoman monarchies. It is around this time when we first see the region being called by its Turkic name Karabakh instead of the original name Artsakh, which may be attributed as far back as to ancient Urartian inscriptions. In the 16th century, the region of Artsakh would come under the control of Persia, but maintained an Armenian autonomy known as the Khamsa, or 5 principalities. During the Persian-Ottoman Wars, the region would briefly fall under the control of the Ottoman Empire in 1583, then return to Persia 20 years later, who predominantly continued to rule over the 5 Armenian principalities until the early 1800s, when Russia started to Russia and occupied the region, and in 1813 they even more Russia'd and annexed Artsakh into the Russian Empire. At first, the Russians recognized the status of the 5 Armenian princes, but a few years later, the Khamsa principalities were finally abolished. The territory was now part of the newly formed Elizabeth-Paul Governorate, and the rest of eastern Armenia became part of the Russian Empire as well. The Armenian princes were able to preserve their rights, and many of them became high-ranking officers in the Russian Imperial Army. Of course, the Russian Empire would collapse in 1917, and the former members of Transcaucasia tried to form a unified state for a brief period, which quickly failed, and Armenia would find itself fighting for survival against an expansionist Ottoman Empire. At this time, the newly formed state of Azerbaijan would proclaim their annexation of Shushi, the capital of Artsakh at the time. This annexation would be supported by the Ottomans at first, and later, following their defeat by the British Empire, who would temporarily station a detachment of troops in Shushi. An assembly of Armenians would meet several times in Shushi and reject Azerbaijan's claim of sovereignty, insisting on their right to self-determination. Tensions would reach their tipping point in 1920 Shushi Massacre, when Azerbaijani troops, joined by the city's Azerbaijani inhabitants, turned Shushi into an inferno. According to an Azerbaijani communist, Musayev, quote, "A ruthless destruction of defenseless women, children, and elderly began. Armenians were exposed to a mass slaughter. And what beautiful Armenian girls were raped and then shot. At an order of Khosrov Bek Sultanov, for more than 6 days, houses in the Armenian part were crushed, plundered, and reduced to ashes. Everyone led women away whenever they wished to executioners. Khosrov Bek Sultanov, keeping speeches, talked to Muslims about holy war, jihad, and called on them to finish off the Armenians of city Shusha, not sparing women or children." End quote. Following that, the population of Shushi would go from 53% Armenian to less than 2% Armenian, and Artsakh would be torn between Azerbaijani occupation and Armenian rebels. Later that year, the region was invaded by the Red Army, and while the status of Artsakh was still being debated, Azerbaijan SSR actually requested Artsakh to be transferred to Armenian SSR, a position that was endorsed by the Russians at first, but reversed 2 days later with intervention from Joseph Stalin. And so in 1923, the Nagorno-Karabakh Autonomous Oblast was created within Azerbaijan SSR, and the capital was moved from Shushi to Stepanakert. According to a 1926 census, population of the oblast was 125,200, 89.2% of whom were Armenian. Although the status of Artsakh was not a major issue during this time, Armenian leadership periodically made requests to transfer the oblast to Armenia SSR, which was either ignored or rejected by Moscow. While the Armenians were sending angry letters to Russia, a politician by the name of Heydar Aliyev was rising in popularity in Azerbaijan SSR, who was advocating tightening Azerbaijan's control over Artsakh, and indeed, in 1973, he would purge the entire leadership of the autonomous region. During the final years of Soviet rule, conflict would erupt between the Armenian majority population and the government of Azerbaijan SSR. In the early 90s, referendums had started taking place in the Soviet republics, declaring independence from the Union. A similar referendum was held in the Nagorno-Karabakh Autonomous Oblast and voted to approve the creation of an independent state. However, the constitution of the USSR would only allow the 15 original Soviet republics to vote for independence, and Nagorno-Karabakh was not one. So the referendum was not recognized. Wait a second. The reason why Azerbaijan can become an internationally recognized state and Artsakh can't is because the constitution of the USSR says so? That makes sense, according to the world? Anyway, the Soviets suggested an enhanced autonomy for the region inside the state of Azerbaijan, which satisfied neither side, and the conflict escalated to the First Nagorno-Karabakh War in '91. During this war, an operation was launched by the Soviet Union under the guise of passport checking that would see the use of predominantly Azeri soldiers accompanied by military vehicles and helicopters to uproot Armenians from several Armenian-populated regions. Despite these attempts being outmanned and outgunned, by 1993, the Armenian forces managed to capture 7 Azerbaijani majority districts outside of the enclave, and a year later in '94, the war would end with full Armenian victory. As a result of this war, hundreds of thousands of Azeris were displaced from Armenia and Armenians from Azerbaijan. The ceasefire of '94 was signed between the 3 warring parties, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and the Republic of Artsakh. This paved the way for the Republic of Artsakh to de facto exist, despite receiving no recognition from the international community, and despite Azerbaijan being co-signatories to the ceasefire, they refused to recognize Artsakh and would periodically violate the ceasefire in the coming years. In 2003, the son of Azeri leader Heydar Aliyev, Ilham Aliyev, was elected president in an election considered fraudulent by foreign outlets. Ilham Aliyev would continue his father's threats and war rhetoric along with ceasefire violations. But despite all that, life in Artsakh was relatively peaceful until 2020, when Azerbaijan, supported by Turkey and Syrian jihadists, began an invasion of Artsakh. The war that lasted 44 days resulted in Armenia's defeat and loss of surrounding territories as well as key cities within Artsakh such as Shushi and Hadrut. The new ceasefire deal also saw the deployment of Russian peacekeeping forces in the region and the formation of a joint Turkish-Russian peacekeeping monitoring station. Final status of Artsakh yet to be determined. As you can see, the history of the plight of the people of Artsakh has not ended. We are watching it unfold before our eyes, while Azerbaijan continues to sweep all evidence of Armenians from any lands they occupy, and the world continues to ignore it. Artsakh has been fighting for their right to exist for hundreds, if not thousands of years, and continues to fight today. And it is truly unbelievable that even today, this land that is so rich historically and culturally continues to be torn apart by dictators and empires.